Three, two, one, punch it.
Could you jump to light speed in that tin can? Go back in time in a DeLorean? Will it crash or take to the sky? Tell me, smart guy, does it fly?
Welcome to Does It Fly, the podcast that puts your favorite sci-fi properties, inventions, and conceits to the test. I'm your mad scientist, Hakeem Oluseyi.
And I'm your pop culture expert, Tamara Krinsky. Time to dive into today's topic and see, does it fly?
This episode of Does It Fly is presented by Screen UK.
Hello, Hakeem.
Tamara, we're back. We're together again.
Exactly. Even though we're not in the same space, we are in the same headspace.
We're in this. I love it. Tamara. You know where I'm going.
Oh, I so know where you're going. Yeah.
That
Well,
is-
that- If your name is Tamara and you're a redhead, there are many Annie references that have come throughout your life. So
I wasn't original. I wasn't the first. What are you?
I mean, 80%. It's a trope. It's a trope. It's all good. It's all good. I like that you're participating in it.
I'm going to give you what I get, and that is the character of Hakeem from Coming to America. Throughout graduate school, I can't tell you how many times I had to hear the sentence, when you think of garbage, or whatever it was, when you think of trash, think of Hakeem. Because, you know, he was trying to impress the dad in the movie, and he was taking out. Yeah, so I love you, Tamara is much better than when you think of garbage. Think of your name, right?
Well, I'm going to recast us both for today because we are here to talk about Doctor Who and the TARDIS. So I think it makes perfect sense that you are our doctor, I am our companion, and we're going to
Yes,
hopefully take
yes.
our audience for a little bit of a ride as we look at the subject of, does the TARDIS fly when it comes to traveling through time and space?
This episode of Does It Fly is presented by Screen UK. Screen UK is a free discovery platform celebrating the very best of UK-produced film, television, animation, and gaming, and sharing it with audiences around the world. Screen UK is the go-to place to discover your next favorite movie, show, or game, and features tons of exclusive behind-the-scenes interviews and all the info you need to find out how and where to watch or play your newest obsessions wherever you are in the world. Make screenuk.org your next stop. As you and I know, but no one else knows, I've been watching Doctor Who since the 1970s. You started yesterday.
Well, not exactly yesterday, but knowing that we were going to do this episode, it did kick me off. Full disclosure, this is a show that I have a lot of friends who are big fans of. It's something I've always wanted to dive into. And to be honest, I was kind of intimidated because it has such a long history, right? Like the show started in the 1960s. It just recently, 1963 to be exact. It just recently celebrated its 60th anniversary. And just to give people some context who may be less familiar, it started before Star Trek. So Star Trek was actually a couple of years later. So, you know, it's a front runner. And the fact that it has been on television, on a screen so consistently over the past 60 years, because it was on until it ran continuously from 1963 to 1989. And then we had a reboot in 2005 with some other things in between and other properties and books and comic books. And yeah, so.
You know what? That's interesting because I graduated high school in 85 and I completed my final temporary, postdoc position around 2005. So Doctor Who took a pause for me to become a scientist, and then it restarted. But let me ask you a question about being intimidated.
Very kind of them. Yeah.
Huh?
I said it's very kind of them to give you the time and space to do your work and then come
exactly.
back on when you're done.
Because I certainly would have failed. I'd have been stuck right in front of the television. But here's the thing. My son, he will not watch a movie if it's one of a series of movies until he has watched what preceded it so that he understands everything.
Okay.
He just refuses. So are you like that? Do you feel like you have to go back to the original Doctor and watch up to today to have a true understanding?
Well, so the good student in me feels like that's what I should do, my type A overachiever. But in looking at this show, I actually asked a couple different friends advice, and I've actually asked this question over the years because, like I said, I have friends who are fans. It's something I've always wanted to watch. It has been intimidating, thinking like, well, where do I even jump in? And their answer was no. You can actually start with the reboot in 2005 because maybe I shouldn't even use the word reboot, the continuation, because it's still the same world, it's the same universe. They're not reinventing the show, they're continuing it, and there are tropes in the show, which we're going to talk about today, that allow that to happen. So while I would have loved to have gone back and watched like everything from the beginning, and I will certainly dip back and continue to do, I felt okay and safe jumping in. And so again, to folks who are listening or watching, if this is a series that you've always wanted to, I would highly encourage you to jump in, because you absolutely can. You'll get it. It's clear. The storytelling is clear enough that you can do that.
Absolutely. And one thing about the show, so for those who aren't familiar with it, let's catch them up a little bit.
Yeah.
So the TARDIS is a technology that we're focusing on today. But Doctor Who has these 4 technologies that have just been consistent throughout the show. The main one being the TARDIS, which stands for, it's TARDIS.
Time and relative dimension in space.
It's able to travel through space and time. It basically dematerializes wherever it is and rematerializes wherever it's going.
That's right. And it's used by the Doctor, who is a Time Lord, and that is we'll call it his vehicle, his mechanism for time traveling.
That's right. And the Time Lords are a species that originate from a planet called Gallifrey. And they were able to discover certain things about nature. They were able to discover this trans-dimensional technology, which the TARDIS is. It's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside.
Is it bigger?
Yes.
On the inside.
Look, we need to concentrate.
Then it is.
Yep, I know where you're going with this, but I need you to calm down.
On the outside?
Oh, you certainly grasped the essentials.
Fine.
And they were able to discover this vortex in space-time that allows the TARDIS and other similar devices that they've had at Gallifrey before it was destroyed by the evil race of aliens known as the Daleks.
Daleks. Exterminate.
Exterminate.
I have to say, my daughter walked in while I was watching. And at first, like, she's not really into scary stuff. She's more of a romantic comedy gal than a sci-fi gal. But she got kind of intrigued, and then she like sat down and she just turned and looked at me and went, They're villains. I know they're supposed to be bad guys, but they're so silly. And I went, yes, they are. That is the joy.
Yeah, you say that until you're face to face with one.
I prefer to keep my Dalek on screen and not in the room. So,
yeah, and occasionally there's a good Dalek. So I mentioned that he has these 4 common technologies because we may talk about them later. There's the TARDIS. There's the sonic screwdriver. There's the universal translator, so you can go to any species and communicate. And then what's that? The psychic paper.
Psychic paper.
Right. The psychic paper. Yeah.
Yeah. And there are so many fun things throughout the show. But today, as you said, we are going to talk about the TARDIS and time and space travel and how that fares both scientifically and narratively. So, Hakeem, why don't you kick us off? Does the TARDIS fly when we're talking science?
Great question. Look, I'm just going to throw this out here. I'm not going to bury the lead because I realized something in thinking about the TARDIS. You know what the TARDIS mimics, and no one I've ever heard say this? A black hole.
Interesting. All right, tell me more.
Okay, so here's why. First thing is, Doctor Who talks about it all the time. Armies have tried to get inside the TARDIS, but you can't. It's impenetrable. You can't get inside, right? That is like one type of black hole known as a white hole, which is a time reverse black hole. Nothing can get inside of it, right? Also, if a bad guy gets inside the TARDIS, because it's consciousness, it can trap them inside so nothing can escape. That's just like a black hole. Mm-hmm. The third thing is that, and this is a little known fact, black holes are bigger on the inside than they are on the outside.
And wait, how do you know this?
Because there's a lot of brilliant physicists who have been studying this for a very long time. And so when you study black holes, basically you're studying the geometry of space-time, right? And so black holes, not only are they bigger on the inside than the outside, but they grow continuously with time on the inside. So even if they shrink down and evaporate on the outside, the inside volume doesn't change. All right. And then the last thing is space travel, to go from from where and when you are now to a different where or when. What can you use to do that? A black hole called a wormhole. Right, so everything black holes do, the TARDIS does. So
the message I'm
maybe-
basically getting from you is that if you go with the idea that the TARDIS works scientifically the way that a black hole would, that it actually is something that exists and can exist in our world.
Well, now, yeah, the space-time manipulation aspects are possible in our world. But let me tell you what's also really, really cool about our world. Excuse me. I forgot. I told you I'm half Time Lord. So, yeah, when I say our world, I mean a TARDIS. When you go inside of a TARDIS, you experience what is known as reverse time acceleration instead of forward time acceleration. And so all of those things I told you about black holes, what makes a black hole a white hole is if you have time reversal, right? What makes a black hole grow constantly with time and create wormholes is because you can have negative space inside of a black hole. And the other thing is, what makes a black hole traversable, how you can hold it open, is if you have negative energy inside the black hole. So the fact that they built in reverse time acceleration, which is also a little known property of black holes in a way, right? Is just too close to me, because also think about this. Black holes are powered by a dying star. Dying stars form black holes.
Black holes are powered by a dying star.
Black holes are formed from a dying star. And TARDISes are powered by a dying star.
It's true.
Yeah.
I want to, break it down for me. I want to know more about reverse time acceleration.
Yeah. So I don't know anything about reverse time. That's in the Doctor Who world. That's a phrase they say all the time. But what physicists have done is they came up with this idea of a white hole, right? And because they wanted to look at wormholes, how do you do interdimensional travel? And so they realized that if you have a time reversed black hole, you form this thing called a white hole. So just like nothing can come out of a black hole, nothing can go in to a white hole. But the whole idea of time reversal doesn't make sense in our everyday world, right? But in the context of the manipulation of time and space, it totally makes sense under these extreme energy densities. And that's what the TARDIS is doing. It's doing a very similar one, but it's not creating the wormholes. This time vortex network already exists, so you can go from whatever where and when you're located to any other where and when that exists in existence, which means, of course, that all time exists at every location, and every location exists at all times. Right. I know that's
Right.
nuts.
So that brings up an interesting question too, which is this idea, right, that so we talked about the idea that the TARDIS, we talked a little bit, we introduced the idea that the TARDIS is actually something that's grown, right, and it's sentient. And what we haven't talked about yet is the fact that part of what makes all of this work is the idea that the Time Lord and the TARDIS have a symbiotic relationship. Right, it's the imprimatur that allows the Time Lord to do that traveling, to go through the time vortex and basically survive on a cellular level. So I'm curious from a scientific perspective, since that's part of this time travel equation in the show, in the real world, as we think about going through space and time and however we can, could humans survive that? Would we be ripped apart?
How far you want to go? That's the, that's the weird thing about it, is because, space ain't space. And what do I mean by that? We have our—
I don't know. Tell me. That's what I'm asking.
Exactly. I always say science ain't science, space ain't space, right? Because our concept of space is based on ourselves. And so, we think, oh, the Earth is big, and if you look at how far humans have gone to the moon, on the grand scale of space, we ain't going nowhere.
There's very little of our neighborhood that we've explored so far.
Right, yeah. And we haven't even left our star. So here's the question now. Suppose you could build a warp drive, which is not what this thing is doing. right? The TARDIS is not using warp drive. But, you're inside of a warp bubble, and so you're not moving through space-time. And so it's analogous because the TARDIS isn't exactly moving through normal space. The TARDIS does fly, but what it's doing normally is not flying. It's dematerializing in one location and rematerializing, in space and time, right? But if you want it to go like super fast through space, you can't go arbitrarily as fast as you want, because even though space, we call it a vacuum, it's not exactly empty. There are, like, for example, small elements, boron, beryllium, the way that they are made is because larger elements are out there in space, and then an alpha particle comes and slams into it and breaks it in part. That's how we get things like boron and beryllium. So guess what those things are going to do when you're moving at 90% the speed of light through space?
They're going to go into me.
Yeah, they're going to go into you with a lot of energy, right? So that's not going to work out so swell for you. So, there are limits to what we can do. And the other thing is that we have had, leading physicists think about wormholes. Imagine, can humans actually traverse a wormhole and do it? And they have designed traversable wormholes. It's something that, scientists, prominent physicists have said, hey, here's how we can do it. We need this one magical ingredient that involves negative energy typically, which we don't have anything that does that. Other than the quantum level, right? So we can't actually do it, but theoretically, it's possible.
Got it. So I guess my question to you then, we talk about the TARDIS flying. As you mentioned, it doesn't actually fly, but in the context of our show, does the science of the TARDIS fly?
Oh my goodness. See, that's why I love you so much.
I'm here to bring your science to light.
You keep us on topic too. So the TARDIS does fly, not very well, but that's not what it's normally doing. So it depends on how you define the science of the TARDIS and its time travel. The way it is described exactly there, this vortex that it utilizes, we don't know that exists. It's not come about because the script writers, the concept developers thought, hey, I have observed this. Now let's put it in the show, right? They're like, no, we've come up with this. Let's put it in the show. So what the TARDIS does in terms of traveling through time and space, if that philosophy that I described to you, which is known as eternalism, where all space exists at all time and all time exists at all space, then the answer is we may be able to travel through all space and time. It could be possible, right? Using warp drive, using wormholes. But if you can do warp drive, it's likely that you could do wormhole travel because you need the same stuff to do both of them.
So basically, from a scientific perspective, it's really about one of the things is about how do we protect our bodies? How do we not get ripped apart? And if you can create the safety of that with the warp drive, sort of that bubble you were talking about,
that warp drive,
then that pushes the science closer to being something that's possible.
Yeah, as well. And it's really the manipulation of space-time in that way. Because if you're going, you're not moving through regular time and regular space to get to these other locations in time and space. So when I talked about inside of a wormhole, you can have negative distance, right? So if you think about if you're on opposite sides of the Earth and you move toward the center, two different traveling parties, you will meet at the center of the Earth. But if two travelers started traveling from opposite sides of a black hole going toward the center, if that black hole happens to be a wormhole, they won't meet at the center. They go to zero and then they go into negative space and keep going without meeting each other, right? And that forms the throat of that wormhole. So it's like an extra dimension, and that's exactly how Doctor Who describes the interior of the TARDIS as a 4-dimensional space where we live in a 3-dimensional space.
Got it. Okay. Now I just want to go to the future and the past and all these places in my TARDIS.
You make a great companion, Tamara.
I think I could be a good companion. I think I could.
How are you with monsters with like the Ood with tentacles hanging out of their face, or weeping angels. You think you could handle
The
that?
weeping angels I want to call them the creeping angels. I mean, I honestly just think they're such a wonderful, wonderful alien creation.
Oh man, they are. Oh, to be touched by a weeping angel.
Okay, so the TARDIS technically does not fly. It materializes, dematerializes, and rematerializes. But from a scientific perspective, does the TARDIS fly?
I say yes, no.
Are you trying to have your cake and eat it too? What's going on?
Well, the manipulation of space-time to travel to different wheres and whens appears to be a true possibility in our universe. All
Okay.
right? Can you grow a machine to do it? That's the difficult part, right? So today you can't make that technology, but I can't say that in the future we're not going to have such technology.
All right. So we've got an official yes, no.
Yes, no. I say it flies. I say if I weigh the yes and the no, I'm going to say yes. The TARDIS flies in terms of interdimensional space-time travel. So Tamara, I love it technologically. How do you feel about it from the pop culture perspective?
Well, it's really interesting. I mean, as we've talked about with any good show, they set up the world and they set up some rules, right? So let's talk about some of the rules that they have set up for the TARDIS and for time travel. So, one of the biggest things they talked about is the idea of don't cross the time stream. You don't want your own time stream. You don't want to meet yourself in a previous incarnation or a future incarnation, or that can screw things up. Right. So that's one of the rules. And then the other big rule is don't change history. You're not supposed to be able to go back and change something. You don't want to change something in the future. So that's a big piece of it.
Wait a
And
minute.
those are
No killing baby Hitler?
no killing baby Hitler.
Oh. What's the point then?
The eternal question. The
Right.
eternal question. And I think so if we're using those two big rules as the jumping off point, I think as somebody who's newer to this franchise, I'm going to be really honest, they break those rules all the time. There's a lot of inconsistency there. And
Yeah.
so, I wonder about that. Now, if you're diving further into the idea of, don't change history, don't change things, it seems like there's a lot more emphasis placed on don't change things in the past, but there's a lot more looseness with changing things in the future. So the very, very loose rules seem to be, if you have observed something, then it becomes a set point in time. Like if you know that it's going to happen. And in the past, of course, you know your own past. So you know these things that have happened. So if you change those things through traveling through space and time, then you end up with a paradox, and that screws around with things. So that's a very loose rule, but yet they seem to mess with it a lot.
Yeah, and no wonder, because this thing's been going on for 60 years. Like, how can you not? It's clear that, somebody at some point is going to come up with a great idea, and they're like, oh, but what about yesterday? And they're going to be like, oh, forget that. This is just too good. Let's do it.
Right, exactly. So, so there's that piece of things. The showrunners have actually talked about the fact that continuity is not that it's not important, and not that canon is important. Of course it is. And that, is the joy of all of these sci-fi shows that we love, and fantasy shows, and the world building that happens. But they've definitely played fast and loose with it. So one of the big rules, right, is don't cross your own time stream. But they do this quite often. I mean, think about the 50th anniversary special, right? Multiple doctors in the same episode.
Yeah, right. So how do you, not only have you met yourself, right? It's a regenerated self. So
Right.
that's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. And, and granted, they do give a couple of nods in the episode to the idea that they are sort of they're slipped in between the time streams. And so ultimately they're not going to remember what happened there. So, they do try to have a narrative conceit that allows you to go, okay, well, they said this isn't supposed to happen. They're making it happen. We're actually okay with it. But if I'm being, very, very analytical and not letting my emotional connections to the series take me away, they're breaking their own rules all the time.
Well, I think, scientifically there may be room for that, for such a rule, because we have this thing called the principle of totalitarianism,
Okay,
which
tell
states
me more.
that any physical process that's not strictly forbidden from occurring by the laws of physics must occur.
Say that again.
Unless the laws of physics say it can't happen, it must happen. So
Why do I feel like every teenager is taught this rule as they're heading into?
it's a rule of
Mom,
life.
you didn't say it couldn't happen.
Yeah.
You
Well,
didn't
that's
say
right.
it was
So
forbidden for me to do this.
they clearly make it, by saying don't do it, they make it possible. It is a possibility for it to occur, right? And so if they do it, maybe there's an exception. Like you said, they went into this other space where they're not going to remember anything, so things aren't going to fall apart. So it is like you break the rule, but, since it's not a hard and fast, the universe does not allow it by the laws of physics, you can still do it. You got to deal with the consequences. So there are ways to minimize consequences.
Yeah, no, I get that. And there are definitely places and times they try to do that. I mean, the whole storyline with Rose and her father, they tried to help the audience understand like his death and how she reacts with that and the emotional arc of that. But there is still a little bit of time travel paradox going on in there.
Yeah, there is. And you bring up something good about the whole emotional arc, right? Because, I love sci-fi. I'm a nerd. I'm a geek. And there are
Really,
certain
I had
things.
no idea.
They had no idea. the robot didn't throw it off, didn't give it away. There's one thing I really, there's a couple of things you can do to really mess up some sci-fi for me.
Yeah.
Love scenes. And the dude takes off his shirt. Who wants to see some gorgeous buffed out man remove his shirt?
Hello, right over here. This one right over here. What's wrong with that?
Well, Doctor Who never removes his shirt, right? That's good. And the love scenes ain't that lovey, if you know what I mean, right? They're not. You don't make out with the companions. They're just kind of like attention.
There's a lot of chemistry. There's a lot of
Yeah.
tension, but that's not what I would call the emphasis of the actual consummation of things is not the emphasis of things. I mean, even with River Song, right? Like
Right.
that is a love story that spans decades, that is timeless, if we would like to say. But that actually brings up another good point, right? Just as far as the way the TARDIS operates, we talked a little bit about the genetic link between the TARDIS and the Doctor. Now, that link is part of what allows the Doctor to to manipulate the TARDIS through time and space. And ostensibly, the Doctor should be the only one doing that, but I'm going to use they since they're, multiple genders that come about through time and space. River Song gets to fly the TARDIS, so that kind of feels like a rule that gets broken.
There you go again. Yet another, right?
Yet another.
Yet another. But listen, whatever they do, okay. So I don't want to jump to the end because I really do want to know that, what is your thought about that? Does that mean that as a plot line? Because I know what I think, but I am so biased here.
You are a little biased. You know what? I have two thoughts. In a way, mine is not the yes/no of does the TARDIS fly in as a story conceit. Mine is actually the writer fan. So in other words, the writer fan. So in other words, writer fan, WRITER /
Writer
fan,
fan. Yeah.
as opposed to yes, no. So that's the split of my two thoughts about this. So as a person watching this franchise, right? And we'll get to like the larger does it fly no matter what in a minute or two, but in a couple minutes. But as a fan watching, I'm definitely noticing things that are not adding up. I'm noticing things that, wait, they said this, but now they're doing this anyway. Hold on a second. My fan side says, I notice these things sometimes, and I'm definitely noticing it, right?
Yeah.
But the writer side of me says there is brilliance in the vagueness of it. Because as a writer, especially as somebody who would be creating new episodes of a show that has been on for so many years and where there's so much lore, there's so much history, to be able to play fast and loose with things, to be able to reinvent things a little bit, I mean, again, we're not talking about regeneration, but even just some of those conceits built into the show, they allow you to explore new things, try new things, come up with new ideas. So from a writer perspective, it flies brilliantly.
You bring up something really interesting because science and technology advances at such a fast rate. Just think about what has happened in the last 60 years. So as a writer, how can you not, take some of that and include it, even if it breaks something that was already existing within the franchise? I mean, yeah.
It's true, but it's also a challenge because when you do have things now that we know scientifically do work and you want to put them in, yet you're dealing with a show that supposedly has already trafficked to the future and knows the future. It's that question of how does the sci-fi in your show keep up with the developments in the real world when you have a show that's been on this long? Now, luckily, we have not figured out, as you were saying, how to travel through, or I'm not going to say we haven't figured it out. Theoretically, we have, but we haven't done it yet. So we're not at that point in our future.
But I'll tell you one thing that we have done. We've gone from knobs and sliders to touchscreens.
This is true. This is very true.
Yeah. So I wonder to the extent how many sci-fi franchises foresaw touchscreens coming and got rid of all those other things. And you know what a lot of movies do? Doctor Who does not, right? It's the heads up 3D display in the air like Iron Man does. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but I think that's part of the charm of Doctor Who, right? I mean, it's almost got I'm not going to say in some ways it almost feels like it has a solar punk kind of aesthetic when you step into the TARDIS and you see the design. I mean, it's still very physical. It's knobs, it's this, it's that. It's you've got to actually plug things in. I mean, I like the fact that he or she is actually a bit of a tinkerer, right? They know how to fix their TARDIS.
That's right. You have to keep it running. But, think about a Gen Z or maybe even a millennial. They don't know anything about phone booths.
It's true.
Yeah. So you're stuck as a 1960s phone booth, which it wasn't 1960s when it was 1960s, if you know what I'm saying. Their 1960s was the 1900s. When I don't know if phones even existed then.
Wait, what do you mean? Now I'm confused. Say that again.
So we're looking at the TARDIS. We're looking at a franchise that has been in existence for 60 years. And the technology that they included was the technology of the day, right? Telephones were new and great, relatively speaking. And you had these public telephones, these public phone booths. And so if they were looking back at their past, 60 years into the past, they're looking at the turn of the century.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
right. But now their past is our past. So that's what we bring to it when we come, and it'll be interesting to see as we go now into this next incarnation of the Doctor, how that affects the stories that we're going to see on screen.
So it copied the real thing. There actually was police boxes.
Yeah, on street corners. Phone for help before they had radios and mobiles.
Why don't you just fix the circuit?
I like it, don't you?
I love it.
But that's what I meant. There's no police boxes anymore, so doesn't it get noticed?
Ricky, let me tell you something about the human race. You put a mysterious blue box slap bang in the middle of town. What do? Walk past it. Now stop your nagging. Let's go and explore.
Yeah. And I guess I wonder to the extent, how do they engage the writers? Do they tell them, see the future and write it into the show? Have you ever been told that?
I mean, having scientific advisors on shows is a very regular kind of a thing. I don't know how the writers' room for Doctor Who works. I don't know if there's a scientific advisor, but I mean, if you look at movies like Minority Report, they worked with a team of futurists to envision all kinds of things, from the personalized advertising and things like that, which, if you think about, we'll talk about that on another show, but we are starting to see things like that in real life when, your phone is in a certain place and it taps into your GPS and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah. The one thing I always think when I see it is video chat. Like that to me was the far in the future science fiction that we now do every day.
like you and I are doing right now.
Like you and I are doing. Wait a minute, we're not in the same room.
Not yet. But if you get me a TARDIS, we could make that happen.
But that is wild now that you mention it, right? We're like on opposite sides of a continent. I'm on the East Coast. You're on the West Coast, allegedly. And
I'll never tell.
that's the science. When I report a measurement, I have to report the uncertainty. I don't know you're on the West Coast.
You don't know for sure.
Yeah, I haven't observed you to be there. But the fact that we're doing this, having a conversation in real time, looking at each other, that just blows my mind. That isn't. All right, Tamara. Just let's be explicit. Not that kind of explicit. Does it fly?
The Whovians are going to hate me for saying this, but if we're speaking strictly narratively, does it always follow its rules that it has set up? The TARDIS in Doctor Who does not fly.
Oh.
But I want to quickly pivot to our overall question, which is, regardless of whether we think it flies scientifically, which in this case is a yes, no, regardless of whether we think it flies narratively, which in my case this time around for the specific device is a no, do we just not care because it's so damn awesome that we think the whole show flies? And I want to say very specifically, I give it a resounding yes. The show flies. And that is a credit to the writers, to the concept, to the actors, and to this amazing world that they've put together. It is so charming. It is so much fun. I love that there's a hero who, wields a screwdriver to fix things. And that is his kind of guiding metaphor, or her guiding metaphor, their guiding metaphor, instead of a gun.
Right.
And that there's somebody who has a positive outlook on humans and believes that humans have potential and is optimistic about the human race. So I want to give it a resounding yes to overall the show does fly.
I love that, and I'm glad you redeemed yourself. Because I was going to ask you, it's not clear to me the exact definitions of the two words heresy and blasphemy, but people were burned at the stake back in the day. That we would never do such a thing today.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Is it so cool? Again, here's a question I have. How do I know my own objectivity? Because as a scientist, right, I have to be objective. And the first thing you do is you have to remove the human from it. So there are foods that I eat that I know are crap, but they're nostalgic for me.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
What's your
That's why I
most
love it.
nostalgic food?
Huh?
What's your most nostalgic food?
Pickled pig lips.
Okay. All right.
Go to New Orleans, you go to a corner store, you see a jar of them sitting on the counter there, pickled pig lips, right? You're not going to get that anywhere but down there. And I tell you, wild, like raccoons, possums, I grew up eating those in the woods of Mississippi. I was in New Orleans and Louisiana, which, hunting cultures. My dad was a big hunter, ate a lot of wild stuff. So it's the same way with certain media that I consume. Certain things are, like I tried to share the Twilight Zone with my son. Put him to sleep immediately. Right?
These kids today.
Right? So can I trust myself when I say, oh, does it ever fly? It is so awesome.
Well, but I think that's the whole point of this final part of the conversation, right? Like, this is the part where you don't have to be objective. Like, it hurts my heart to try to be very objective narratively and look at, what's actually written, what's actually on the screen, the rules, like to be very black and white about it. But I think this is the part where you get to throw objectivity out the window and say, how does this make you feel? And when I think about the fact that there is a blue police box I can walk into and it's bigger on the inside and it has a swimming pool, I mean, how cool is that?
It has everything but a dinosaur. Probably there's a dinosaur in there. That is cool, Kamara.
What's that? Wait, if you could specify a room to be built inside the TARDIS for you, what would you want to be built?
Oh, an observation deck that allows me to look anywhere in the universe at any scale. If I want to
Ooh.
look at the center of a star, if I want to see myself from the perspective of inside the nucleus of an atom or inside of a proton, right?
Hmm.
Or, because I often think about, what are the coolest places in the universe? Like, for example, every galaxy is surrounded by these tight clusters of up to 1 million stars in 100 light years, right? If you look at like 100 light years around the sun, it's of order 10,000, right? So it's 100 times more stars in these. So I've always thought, what if I lived on the edge of a globular cluster above a galaxy? So one half of the year, I'd be looking at the plane of that galaxy in my night sky. And the other half of the year, I'd be looking interior to those million stars, that globular cluster. But
Oh.
a lot of these super cool places, like what if I was at the surface of a neutron star? They're instantly deadly. So you,
Why is it that so many of the amazing things that in the world or places we want to go would mean instant death? What does that say?
you don't even have to be so exotic, right? Like even the bottom of the Mariana Trench, right? The
Yeah.
core of the earth, the mantle of the earth. Looking at a mantle plume. That's what I would do. I would have, one technology in Doctor Who we have not discussed, which
What?
is that piece of paper he has,
Mm-hmm.
where whatever he wants the person to think, I forget what they call it, right?
The
But it's just,
psychic. It's the psychic paper.
yeah, the psychic paper, right? That
Right.
is super amazing in and of itself. But this would be like a psychic or not a holodeck exactly, but
No,
more of a
because you'd
window.
actually see it for real, right? As opposed to
Yeah,
it being a hologram. It's almost more like taking advantage of the idea of shifting in time and space. Well, it sounds like part of it too is not just being able to visit different places in time and space, but also changing the scale at which you'd have
yeah.
like a scale lever,
There's a
you
scale
know?
lever, and there's
Yeah.
also you're safe because you're not actually materializing in these locations, but
Okay. All
you're
right.
viewing them at whatever scale. So you could have extreme temperatures, extreme
Hmm.
pressures, you name it, right? And you're safe, but you can view it. But that is a brilliant, excellent question. Love it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
My answers are not quite as magical, but I've thought about this a little bit, and I have two. One is that I have always said that, like, I don't know if there's like a heaven or an afterlife, but if there is, I want mine to be a big ass library that has
Ooh,
with very comfy chairs and a roaring fireplace and all of the books that I want to read in this life and just have no time to read. So I feel like on the TARDIS, you could essentially put a pause on time, like sit into that chair, get your snack, have that, and you could just read all the things you want to read. So that's my nerdy side. My practical side is
wait,
that,
I got to interject here.
yeah.
What you just described was the episode of Twilight Zone that I showed my son, where the
Wait,
dude would,
what?
yeah, where he
What?
goes into the bank vault to read on his break, and he comes out, and there's been a nuclear war, and everything's destroyed, and he goes to find the library, and then he breaks his glasses. Right? That's your,
I have not seen that episode yet. Okay, now I'm gonna have to go look it up.
yeah.
That's fantastic. All right, I'm adding that to my list. My other list of things that I need to watch and have no time to watch. Um, the other room that I would love to add, and this is a little bit more practical, is I really love to cook, and I
Ooh.
really hate to clean up. So my room in the TARDIS would be a state-of-the-art kitchen that cleans itself up.
Oh, that's awesome. But I have a cure for you. I used to
Yeah.
hate to clean up too. Then I went to the U.S. Navy, and you swab enough decks, you fold and unfold your cot and your stuff all over and over because they tear it up when they're training you. Then you just become a great cleaner, and you're efficient
I'm
at it.
a
You're good at it.
very good cleaner. My mom trained me very, very well. That
Yeah,
just doesn't, I
you're
just,
just
I don't
reluctant.
enjoy it.
Yeah, but once we throw you in boot camp, you're no longer going to be reluctant.
I'm gonna fight you on that again. Like I've been cleaning up things my whole life. Like
Okay, I
I don't
understand
think
what you're
there's any way
saying.
you'll make me enjoy it. I do it. It's spick and span when I'm done. I don't not do it, but
So
if
we're gonna
I
have to
could
send you
actually
to
just
the.
spend the time cooking, I would want to just spend the time cooking.
I hear you, but we're gonna have to send you to the Marine Corps because the Navy clearly isn't enough to put you in line, and I'm starting to see some defiance. The civilian thought process you got going on here is not going to get that kitchen cleaned.
Well, I'm not going to choose. I'm not going to choose any particular division. I work with an org called the U.S. Vets, which helps with vet homelessness,
Oh, no
and
way.
we help across the board. So
That is wonderful. Thank you so much.
yeah, of course.
I'm going to be looking for my present on Veterans Day. That's why I tweet every year. Another Veterans Day pass. Where's my presents?
All right. Well, if you look on my Instagram, there's a shout out to vets on Veterans Day with my swag. So yeah.
Love that. Love that. See, I
yeah.
find out something cool and awesome about you every time we chat. All right. So, yes, no, technically, no, plot narrative, consistency, but we're both hardcore heck yes on Doctor Who's TARDIS. Catch you next time. And hey, listen, thank you guys for tuning in and listening to Tamara and me doing what we love. Science, sci-fi, and just chilling.
Absolutely. And please let us know in the comments on your platforms. We want to know what you think about the TARDIS. We want to know if you think it flies. We want to know what are the things, are there paradoxes and inconsistencies that make you frustrated with the show, or actually is that what makes you love it even more?
Love it. This episode of Does It Fly is presented by Screen UK. Screen UK is a free discovery platform celebrating the very best of UK-produced film, television, animation, and gaming, and sharing it with audiences around the world. Screen UK is the go-to place to discover your next favorite movie, show, or game, and features tons of exclusive behind-the-scenes interviews and all the info you need to find out how and where to watch or play your newest obsessions wherever you are in the world. Make screenuk.org your next stop.